Mindfulness-Based Relapse Prevention, and 12-Step Approaches. This is from Mindfulness-Based Relapse Prevention for Addictive Behaviors, a Clinician's Guide, 2nd edition. Over the past decade, the ways in which MBRP can serve as either an alternative or as a complement to 12-step involvement have become increasingly evident. 12-step programs have long been the most accessible and common approach to addictions treatment, and their effects are immeasurable. For many, the labels, terms, and path to recovery outlined by a 12-step approach provide validation of their experiences, relief from confusion and shame, accountability, direction, and a strong sense of community. However, for others, the same labels and processes may feel constraining, disempowering, or punitive, or be misaligned with their beliefs and experiences. Some of the people who are drawn to MBRP are seeking an alternative. Others for whom 12-step has been a solid support have found MBRP serves as a useful supplement. While there are distinct differences between these approaches, there are many areas of overlap in their underlying themes and structure, including an emphasis on acceptance, letting go of personal attempts to control things not under our control, importance of consistent connection to program practices, and the value of contemplative practice, such as prayer and meditation. The points on which they diverge center primarily on the foundational view of addiction. Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, Narcotics Anonymous, NA, and other 12-step approaches are based on a combination of the disease and spiritual models of addiction, which view substance abuse and dependence as chronic progressive diseases of the brain. Affected individuals may often encourage to accept the label of addict or alcoholic and to admit powerlessness over this disease. They are encouraged to enlist the support of a higher power to aid them in their recovery. In contrast, the MBRP approach discourages the use of and identification with labels, positive or negative. It incorporates elements of cognitive behavioral relapse prevention that focus on coping skills, exploring cognitive and behavioral antecedents of addictive behavior, and increasing self-efficacy. These practices, taken together and intended to foster a sense of agency and freedom, such that one's actions are arising from greater self-awareness, acceptance, and compassion. Another difference between the 12-step model and MBRP lies in their approaches to abstinence. Commitment to abstinence goals is a requirement for participation in AA and NA, whereas in MBRP, although abstinence is often viewed as an ideal goal, it is not a requirement of treatment participation. Clients often set their individual goals, which may be total abstinence or may involve a more stepped approach towards abstinence or harm reduction. In the cognitive behavioral relapse prevention approach, relapse is expressively discussed, focusing on events preceding the initial use of a substance or lapse, as well as what happens following a lapse. According to this model, a lapse is often followed by what is referred to as the abstinence violation effect, or the self-blame, guilt, and loss of control that is typically experienced after the violation of a self-imposed rule. An individual may have the thought, "I have already failed, so I may as well go all the way." This puts the individual at an increased risk of relapse. Relapse prevention emphasizes the seriousness of a lapse, while encouraging individuals to recognize that they still have the choice to cope effectively following a lapse and to return to their initial goals. Similarly, another MBRP strongly supports abstinence. It's up to participants to decide what, if any, changes they choose for themselves. Because MBRP is designed as an aftercare program, participants typically have already undergone treatment and thus may have clarified their own goals or have had enough to comply with the goals of a legal system or treatment program. The MBRP approach does not necessarily address goals, however. The mindfulness-based practices encourage individuals to become familiar with their thoughts, emotional reactions, and behavioral patterns, and to see for themselves which are working in their lives and which are problematic or damaging. For some, this might result in reduction in or alteration of patterns of use, and for others, it may result in complete abstinence. A lapse is seen as a common occurrence in the change process and represents a learning opportunity rather than a failure or a return to square one. The overarching focus of NBRP on increasing awareness, however, allows flexibility to consider the individual needs and objectives of varied treatment programs. These differences may not be apparent for some people. For others, they might arise when discussing relapse. For example, in Session 6 discussion of the relapse cycle, a lapse or single use is differentiated from a return to a full-blown cycle of relapse. It is often useful at this point to turn the discussion over to the group rather than presenting a certain model or theory of relapse. Participants can share experiences of previous relapses and the specific events leading up to the initial lapse. This often initiates a more organic discussion of various points in the chain of events where there might be opportunities to pause, stepping out of the automatic mode and breaking the chain of habitual behavior. The approach is collaborative and tends to lead to a more natural and relevant discussion of the role of thoughts, as well as sensations and emotions following an initial lapse, and the potential of mindfulness practices in changing this pattern. Fundamentally, both 12-step and MBRP approaches begin with the realization that one's present behavioral and cognitive habits are causing suffering, and that the refuge of substance use and other addictive behavior is ultimately a false one. Both programs encourage developing wisdom to discern what we can and cannot control, and an acceptance of that which is not in our control. Finally, the programs similarly encourage recognition of factors that increase vulnerability to relapse or other problematic habitual behaviors, such as states of body and mind, examples lonely or tired. They appreciate the mind's tendency to attach to unhelpful patterns, example resentments in the 12-step approach, or judgments and stories in MBRP, that ultimately cause more suffering, therefore increase the risk of relapse.